All right, Ecclesiastes 8, verse 10. Mercy knows. Maybe a long day if you can't say Ecclesiastes. Are there any announcements we need to make? Anything going on that we need to know about? Jay? Okay, good, good. Anything else? Glad to hear that. Jay's got all the announcements on the announcement sheet. Be sure and look at that. Know what's going on. Ecclesiastes 8, verse 10. Let's start with a question. When I mention the word death, whatever comes to your mind, what comes to your mind? Finality. Yeah, very much so. From a physical standpoint, what else? Sadness. Sadness and grief that comes along with it. What else? Chance and an opportunity. Absolutely. Absolutely. What else? The unknown. Very much so. What else? Paradise. There you go. That's a good thought. What else? That's a good list. It really is. We know that death's real. Now, some folks talk about it being illusionary, but an illusion, but those folks say everything's an illusion. We know that it's real. We know that it happens. We know that it happens to everybody. Death is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter who you are. Death comes. Death comes to you individually. You know, if not, if you live long enough, somebody you know and love. We all will sit at the front of a church building or a funeral home as part of the family of an individual that has passed, and we'll listen to a preacher preach a lesson or somebody say something nice about the individuals, and spend time together as a family and grieve the loss of a loved one. We know that death is, as the Hebrew writer said, it's appointed. It's an appointment. It's an appointment you can't not miss. You can miss your doctor's appointment. You can miss an appointment with a friend, but you cannot miss an appointment of death. But it is really, in many ways, a great equalizer of all mankind. You know, some folks, because of situations in their life, live very poorly. They live almost day to day. Some folks live, as we would call them, middle class. They have some things, they don't have everything. Some folks live very high on the hog. You know, the 5-star motels is where they go to when, excuse me, when they vacation a lot. They have a lot. They have a lot of things here on the earth. And the reality of it is that no matter who you are, or whatever your socioeconomic level is that you're going to die. And Solomon deals with death. Solomon deals with this aspect of death. He's been spending this time, and we've talked, just as a quick reminder, we've talked about this book of Ecclesiastes being a book that I see it, Solomon writing towards the end of his life. Sort of a book to his children, if you will. Here's what I learned. Don't make the same mistakes. Here's what I found out. Try not to duplicate it. And so as he writes this, he spends the biggest portion of this book that we've already really studied as his search for happiness. His search for happiness included sort of chapter 2 would probably be the best summary of it: wine, women, and wealth. And he found out that that's not where happiness is. That's not where you find happiness. And he gets to especially beginning in the 8th chapter. He's already hinted at this a few times, but he begins in the 8th chapter. He talks about death. And as he talks about death and death being the great equalizer and death coming and being in many ways final, but yet there's evidently something that's known but unknown, and we'll talk about that in the 9th chapter. He deals with death from the standpoint of you're going to die. But there's some things you need to know about it. And some things that I see, Solomon talking, I see as you approach it. And so he's reminding, like I say, his kids. And so we got down to the 10th verse of the 8th chapter. He'd been talking about obeying authority and obeying authority from the standpoint of following what they had set down. And he says, with regards to death, then he says, then I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This also is vanity. I saw the wicked buried. Now, there's several different ways to take that discussion. First of all, he saw the wicked buried. Finally, they get their just deserts, if you will. They die, just like everybody else. So in many ways, he says, okay, even the wicked die. You know, we think the wicked have everything and the wicked will live forever. The wicked will die. But notice as he continues to read this, the wicked die, they're buried. He says, they've come, they've gone from the place of holiness, and they were forgotten. There's something in that I had been thinking about, not with regards to Solomon, but I've been thinking about for a long time. And that is that we all leave our mark on society. We all leave our mark on the folks that we're around. But as we grow older, one of the things that diminishes is our circle of influence and the folks that we are around. This is my thinking. I was looking the other day because of the sermon last Sunday night and funerals that I had performed. And I was thinking about the fact that I've done folks from 6 weeks old. I've done babies' funerals. I've done several more than I want to do, but I've done several babies' funerals all the way up. I did a lady, she was 104, I believe, 105, somewhere in that neighborhood, years old. I've done those funerals for that age span. And one of the things you notice is that when they're younger, whether it's babies or it's teenagers, I've done teenagers' funerals, there's a large turnout. But as we grow older, our friends can't get out to go to the funeral home, bless their hearts, and we have very small funerals. And that's not to say, though, those folks have not made a mark people that have been around. It's just to say that the people not able to get out. And you're seeing, at least I'm seeing, more graveside services or, visitation for 2 hours. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. Cost is one of them. COVID is another. Circle of influence is another. But, we'll have 2 hour visitation and then, but we used to, you used to have 3-day visitation. I mean, you drug it out, you have visitations Thursday, you have, say, Thursday evening, all day Friday, and Saturday till 2 o'clock, and then you'd have a funeral at 2 o'clock. And then it got to where, because of cost was one of the major factors, not the only, but one of the major factors. You got to where you just have visitation Friday and then funeral Saturday. Now you're just getting where you have visitation funeral on Saturday. And there's, like I say, there's a lot of factors to that. But Solomon, I think, in verse 10 is just saying, look, the wicked seem to get by with it here upon the earth, but that's, they're going to die. And then he says in verse 11, because the sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the hearts of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Now, that makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense from the standpoint of what men do. Now, I'm not saying it's right, but it makes sense because here's what Solomon is saying. Solomon is saying, hey, folks do evil, and God doesn't strike them dead immediately. God doesn't punish them. We don't have Ananias and Sapphira anymore, right? We don't have that kind of situation anymore. God is long-suffering. While he's not willing that any should perish, but he's wanting folks to come to repentance, right? Now, paraphrase, that's half quote, half paraphrase, 2 Peter 2. But think about what Peter even says. In 2 Peter 3, he talks about how that folks live the way they want to live because they've waited this long for the Lord's return and he hasn't come back. And so here's what Peter says. They say that all things continue even as they were. And so they ask the question, why? If we had the situation, if God had established the situation like Ananias and Sapphira, would that really work? Well, who knows? Could we convict a lot of people that way? You'd straighten up, you'd do better, wouldn't you? You'd try to walk that line a little closer. But Solomon says here, he says, you need to know something. He says, just because God delays it, he says they're still going to, they do evil. He didn't say this is right. In fact, his tone is a condemning tone. But he goes on to say, though a sinner, verse 12, does evil 100 times and his days are prolonged, yet I surely know that it will be well with those who fear God, who fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, nor will he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before God. So you see, he comes to the conclusion. Here's his conclusion. His conclusion is fear God, right? Fear God, keep his commands. He's going to say that. But he already hints at it right here. He says, but I know this. He says, it's better for the man to fear God. While the wicked seem to get by with it, they'll one day die. And of course, we know then we can plug in the New Testament that, yeah, they're going to one day die. And of course, after that, the judgment. And so Solomon says, I know it's better. I know while the wicked will seemingly prolong their days, he says, there still is a shadow. They'll still see judgment. The days of our years are very short. And he says it's not going to be well for the wicked. Why? Because he does not fear before God. The reverence that we have for God, the fear that we have for God, the respect that we have for God, the fact that we live for God, that's what's important. Now, let's take this on a little different venue, and maybe it'll create some discussion. A little different avenue, a little different approach. Excuse me. And that is this. The wicked will get theirs one day. But how much are the righteous willing to give the Lord in their day? Thought about that? How much will the righteous give the Lord on his day? Had an individual one time was thinking about coming to worship where I was preaching, and we were talking, and they said, well, tell me about your service. And they said, I want it to really be something, because if I'm going to give my 1 hour a week to the Lord, I want it to be good. I couldn't comprehend that, to be honest. And so I explained to them the worship service. I explained to them the preaching that I do, the way I do it. But that whole concept, I'm gonna give the Lord 1 hour this week. I want to be good. Well, I'm going to let God judge them. I am going to let God judge them. I'm going to look at them kind of funny, but I'm going to let God judge them. And so I think here that Solomon says, just reminds us that wickedness doesn't pay. Fear God. Now, surely I have struck a chord. I've tried. Anybody have anything you want to say? Mhm. I don't know if he's talking about that or the priesthood. I don't know. I think that's a good possibility. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Some don't even give that, but yeah. Or thumb plate. Oh man, yes, very true. I really don't know. I think your possibility is a very good possibility. The right, I've seen folks have a. I try not to judge people, but we are fruit inspectors, and it's hard for me to understand now. As my sweet wife, she and I have had many, 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 many conversations because, preacher's wife, sometimes they have to endure what the preacher is feeling and talking about. And I appreciate her attitude. Her attitude is, well, Paul, if they get there, I will be glad to see them. And I don't care as long as I'm there. And so, that's what was it? What was it I shared with you not long ago? I read somewhere somebody said there's going to be, I think he said 3 surprises. I can't remember all the surprises now, but when in heaven, he says, the surprise that I'm there, the surprise of some that aren't there, and the surprise of others that are. Anything else? Yeah. College friendship. Oh, Yogi was a good one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not counting on too many people being in mine. Oh, yeah, there you go. That's funny. Well, Solomon continues, and the thought really of this little section ends here in this one verse. He says, there is a vanity which occurs on earth, that there are just men to whom it happens according to the work of the wicked. Again, there are wicked men to whom it happens according to the work of the righteous. I said this also is vanity. There are injustices in our world. But here's the thing. Don't be pessimistic. Don't be cynical. There are injustices in this world. God knows that, and we know that. We see it all the time. There are injustices in this world. There are folks that, that are very wicked, that have a lot of stuff and seemingly have a good life. There are folks that are good folks that seemingly have nothing and struggle. I think of a lady that I know that by the time she was 55, I guess would probably be about the age. 55, she'd lost her husband. She'd lost her 3 kids. She had nothing from a standpoint of family. She had one sister and lived fairly close. Her mother then came and lived with her and for a little while, and then her mother passed. And, you know, she has a struggle. And you think, man, that's unfair. And it is in many ways. And then when you look at the wicked and you see the life they live and seemingly nothing, they don't have any cares. And everything's great. I dealt with a man, you've heard me tell the story of Marshall, and I can talk about Marshall freely because he gave me that right. Marshall was, before I met him, big alcoholic. Marshall started coming to church. I met him at the right time, and I got him to come to church. He was baptized. I was able to baptize him for the remission of his sins. Marshall died a terrible death, cirrhosis of the liver. You've ever seen that death? I've seen it more than once. It's as bad as any cancer. And Marshall, you would think, man, that's unfair. Yeah, he lived a life, pretty rowdy. As he said, I've been in jail. I've been in bar fights and I've been in jail. Yeah, I got you. But he turned his life around. Then to get, to have, of course, you can say, well, he was reaping what he had sowed earlier. And I get that. But here he is a Christian, and he hadn't been a Christian but a couple of years. And he gets this diagnosis. And he dies pretty quick after that, about a year later. And you think, man, that's not fair. Well, that's kind of what Solomon is saying. There's some injustices in the world, but at the same time, while there are injustices, don't get pessimistic. Don't get cynical. Understand that it'll all come to an end, and it'll be all right. Anything else? The thought changes, so anything else? Oh yeah. Well, yes, I think that you see a man giving advice, but not necessarily living advice in this book. And so, like I say, if this is towards the end, maybe he looks back and he sees all that stuff that he's done wrong. And I'm 60 years old, and I've started doing that, looking back. I look back more now than I look forward, because forward's not near as many days as back was. And I don't think so. My wife's going to kill me. Well, it just depended on the health, Um, I, I don't know, for whatever. I've been blessed to be able to memorize a lot of the Bible, not all of it, by any stretch of the imagination, But sitting in my office one day, Psalm 90 came to mind. The days of our years, the old King James says, 10, 70, if by reason of strength, 80, soon cut off, we fly away. And I spent a little bit of time thinking about that. And I thought, 80. Okay, if that's the life expectancy of God, and of course we live longer, and I'm all for that. I'm voting for that. But that's only 20 more years. Wow, that really hit home. And so you have to put everything in perspective, I think. So I'm going to try to make these 20 years count. So y'all going to get a lot of good sermon. No. Anything else? Well, you don't talk about a mystery. He says, verse 15, so I commended enjoyment, because a man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry. For this will remain with him in his labor all the days of his life, which God gives him under the sun. It's kind of interesting, because this is true, but it can be taken too far, right? It's good advice. Live while you can. Live your life. Live it to the fullest. Live it and enjoy it. But when it's taken too far, when you take God out of the equation, God out of the picture, then, as Steve says, you really haven't listened to what he said in verse 12 and 13, fear the Lord. You got to have the Lord in that life, but you can still eat, drink, and be merry. You can still enjoy. Now, the Epicureans took the philosophy of eat, drink, and be merry, right? And they took it to an extreme. And their extreme was, as Paul, you go back to the book of Colossians, Paul really quoted them. He says, eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we'll die. That philosophy folks had in New Testament times, the Epicureans. And their philosophy didn't include God. Well, we can enjoy life. We can live life to its fullest. Enjoy life. Enjoy the little things. And notice, and I hope you have, I haven't pointed it out, but notice that there's a couple of words that come up quite a few times in these few verses. First of all, it's the word vanity. And then it's the words under the sun. Vanity just simply means it's it's useless, it's futile. But then the phrase under the sun, we've talked about it several times. It's appeared throughout this book. Just talks about here upon the earth. And so he says really that no man can comprehend the totality of all things. Or can he understand all things that God's doing? And so he said, verse 16, when I applied my heart to know wisdom, and see the business that is done on the earth, even though one sees no sleep day or night. Then I saw all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. For though a man labors to discover it, yet he'll not find it. Moreover, though a wise man attempts to know it, he'll not be able to find it. God gives us richly all things to enjoy. And it just seems like when we figure out one thing, there's something else, right? There's something else. There's something else. We never find it all. And so Solomon says, life's a great mystery. We never see the end, never understand it all. Anything else? He continues with the thought of death, but in the next chapter, but is anything else? Okay, well, he's going to talk as we ease into the 9th chapter then and spend more time talking about death, and we'll probably get right to where I leave you with a lot of something to question. But he talks about death really is unavoidable. In these first 10 verses or so, he's going to try to get folks to understand, really, in many ways, I think, a New Testament principle: trust in the Lord, live by faith. And as you do that, enjoy what God has given you. Enjoy what time you have. Make the most of what you have. Take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way. Now, we miss a lot of opportunities, don't we? I mean, everything from just being nice to people, to saying hello to people, to inviting people to church, to bringing them to church. We miss a lot of opportunities in a day's time, really, in a week's time, in a month's time, in a year's time. But Solomon is going to say, take advantage of every opportunity. Let's look at what he says. For he says, I considered, I thought, I pondered all this in my heart, so that I could declare it all, that the righteous and the wise in their works are in the hand of God. Only God knows your future. God has chosen not to affect your future, but he knows your future. Now, can he affect it? Yes. Well, does that mean, Brother Paul, that I can't pray and my future be affected? No, you pray and God will touch that. But notice that life goes on, that the righteous and wise, they consider their works, but they're all in the hand of God. You see, he's coming to a conclusion. Like they said, so rightly so, Solomon didn't live the most righteous of lives. Now, that probably goes back to the fact that he had, in 1 Kings chapter 11, he had all those wives and concubines, right? You remember that? Remember I told you the story about the little boy in Bible school that quoted to the teacher that Solomon had so many wives and so many cucumber vines. So, so, so he said, and verse 4 says, and wives who were idolatrous. It doesn't say the idolatrous. You have to get that from the context. But they turned away his heart from God. Solomon didn't follow God all the time. Solomon, like I still say I believe he's writing this at the end of his life. And he says, okay, we need to fear God. He says, I considered this. And he says, I know everything's within the hands of God. And he says, people know neither love nor hatred by anything they see before them. All things come alike to all, he says at the beginning of verse 2. It doesn't matter who you are or the station in life. It doesn't make you immune to death. That's what he's going to say here. Look what he says, finish verse 2. One event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good, the clean, the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner. He who takes an oath, as he who fears an oath. You're going to die. You're going to die. Seems pessimistic, doesn't it, in some ways? It is reality, right? We kind of answered that in the first. It's part of life. But he seems somewhat pessimistic. Well, we're all going to die. But think about this. Let's think about it a little differently. Let's think about it more within the context of Solomon. If Solomon's writing to his children, who was one of the wealthiest men at that time? Solomon, right? You got to leave it to somebody. Remember earlier he said they're going to take it and they're going to live it up on my money. They're not going to care what I left them. They're just going to care that I left them something. And so now he's saying, you better watch out. You got to remember God. You got to keep God in all this, and you got to know that you're still going to die. You ever heard of cryogenics? There you idea of freezing yourself? Yeah. Guess what? You still die. You can't miss it. Solomon is saying that, and he says in verse 3, he says, this is an evil in all that's done under the sun, that one thing happens to all. Truly, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil. Madness is in their hearts while they live, and after they go to the dead. But for him who is joined to all the living, there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. Death has a way of revealing everything, doesn't it? Everything comes to the forefront. Sometimes you don't know families are in fights till you have a funeral. You might say, do what? Well, think about it. I know of a family that had, the patriarch and matriarch, they had 4 children. I think that's right. I'd have to really stop and count. But 4 children. I thought they all got along, the brother and sisters got along real well. They had a funeral. I found out that one sister had kind of stepped out of bounds on some stuff. And she'd let all the rest of them have it. I mean, she'd take them off and they'd fuss and fought for several years. Didn't know this. I thought they got together every Thanksgiving and Christmas and had a big old time. Funerals kind of bring that out in families. It brings out. I recall one time. I won't say who this was, but the grandparents passed away, so the children, there were 6 children in all, but there were 4 that were alive at that point in time. And so there wasn't much, but there was a house and there were furnishings in the house, and I think there was a little bit of money left, not much. Jim, I bet you can tell a lot of stories. But but this one, yeah, they're a lot better than this one. But this family, all of a sudden, this one particular one, this man said, well, I'll just tell you, it was my family. my dad said, you know, you love your aunt so and so. I said, yeah. He said, man, she turned into a different woman when there was money involved, when they were trying to settle the estate. Yeah, I'm sure that's right. Death has a way of doing that. And so Solomon says here, death reveals a lot of problems. But then he says in verse 4, just something that seems interesting. It's contrast. But for him who is joined to all living, there's hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. Life does have a mixed bag, but life's really better than death, he says, seemingly here. But life gives us the opportunity to do what? Change, right? Repent of any wrong, correct anything that needs to be corrected, get in line with God. And so he says, really, look at the difference. He says, living, there is hope. But what about the dead? Well, then the antithesis would be true. If the statement is true, in other words, if you make a statement and it is true, then the opposite is also true. So if you make a statement that the living have hope, then what do the dead have? No hope, right? The antithesis is also true. And so he says the living have hope. Death brings an end that you cannot gain by anything, by wisdom or anything. Now, before I look at verse 5, somebody wants to say anything. 5 and 6 are interesting. All right. For the living know that they'll die. Yes, that's true. But the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for their memory of them is forgotten. Also, their love, their hatred, and their envy have not perished. Nevermore will they have a share in anything done under the sun. Now, this is a tricky verses, whether you think about it or not. And I'm going to start the argument. No. We'll start. We'll see how far we get in this discussion, and see what you think about it. But look what he says: "The living know that they'll die." Okay, statement of fact. We got that. We've already established that fact. But the dead know nothing. Now, admittedly, there's not a period there, right? But remember, also, Solomon didn't write in periods and commas and semicolons. Solomon was blessed. He didn't have to write in periods and colons and semicolons and all that stuff. But commas and colons and semicolons put in there by translators. But he says, the dead know nothing. Well, how much did the dead know? Wait a minute, we got a problem. Because it would seem as if in Luke 16, the story of the rich man Lazarus, that guess what? There was knowledge. There was knowledge. The question of what do you know, or when do you know, and what do you know when you die? Well, it seems to me, and like I say, I'll just throw this out there, and maybe sometime we'll spend time discussing death and dying and the afterlife and degrees of punishment, reward, and all of the different things that come along with that subject. It would appear from a scriptural standpoint that when we die, we have knowledge. We understand. When we go into the next realm, we understand. Now, to what degree? The Bible doesn't seem to tell us. The Bible doesn't seem to show us. But from the story of the rich man Lazarus, think about the discussion that was had. And think about how that the rich man, send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool the tongue, for I'm in torment. And then he asked, what? Send him back to my brothers, right? Am I telling the story right? This is yes, this is no, this is, I haven't read it in a while. And remember the response from the Lord. They have Moses and the prophets. In other words, they have the Word of God. Let them hear them. So there's not if you will, a coming back and forth from that state, if you will, to the physical, from the spiritual to the physical. There's not you don't come back and forth. They have Moses and the prophets. That's all they need. Let them hear them. So they evidently had knowledge, had understanding, had memory. Now, Solomon says, the living know that they'll die, but the dead know nothing. But understand, there's not a period there. And they have no more reward, for their memory of them is forgotten. How much emphasis, how much does an individual that has passed away, how much do they remember about what is here? I'm not real sure. And I personally, and I could be taught and willing to be taught, don't know that scriptures really give us a firm explanation and understanding of that. Solomon, though, here, if you'll notice what he says, these folks, so far from a bodily sense and worldly affairs past, do they know what's going on here upon the earth? I'm not so sure. Let's look at a couple of passages, if you don't mind. Look in Job, chapter 14. Job 14, verse 21. Let's go a little bit earlier than that, if you don't mind. Let's go to about verse 20. You prevail forever against him, and he passes on. You change his countenance and send him away. His sons come to honor, and he does not know it. They are brought low, and he does not perceive it. But his flesh will be in pain over it, and his souls will mourn over it. There's a death coming, Job says. And so there's things that they do know and things that they don't know. Now, just hold your thought there for just a second. Let's look at one more passage. Isaiah 63. Beginning in verse 15. Isaiah says, look down from heaven and see from your habitation, holy and glorious. Where are your zeal and your strength, the yearning of your heart and your mercies towards me? Are they restrained? In other words, here he's saying, God, yeah, look at me. Doubtless you are our Father. Though Abraham was ignorant of us and Israel does not acknowledge us, you, O Lord, are our Father, our Redeemer. From everlasting is your name. O Lord, why have you made us stray from your ways and hardened our hearts from your fear? Return to your servants for your servants' sake, the tribe of your inheritance. Your holy people have possessed it but a little while. Your adversaries have trodden down your sanctuary. We have become like those of old over those whom you never ruled, those who were never called by your name. He says, here's the point. It seems as if, from a bodily standpoint, the dead may not know what's going here on the earth. Because if you keep reading, when he says the dead know nothing, he talks about, look at verse 6, in anything done under the sun. It's not to say they don't have knowledge. You might say, well, okay, let's go back. Let's go back to the rich man and Lazarus. And he had knowledge of his brothers. But here's the question that needs to be answered, and I don't know that we can answer it from that story. And that is, did he know what was happening at that point to his brothers? Or had he known just that his brothers were hardened, they didn't listen to God, and he thought if somebody came back from the afterlife that they would listen? And so it was just a sort of a continuum of what he thought. That's something to ponder. It seems to me, when you read verse 5 and you say, well, what do the dead know? Well, evidently they know where they are. I think the best answer is this. Because you see, oftentimes when folks pass away, folks ask me, well, do you think Daddy knows what I'm doing now? Do you think Uncle so-and-so knows what I'm doing now? I don't think so. Because the dead know nothing. Where is it? Well, it's under the sun, verse 6, that phrase that means here upon the earth. And so to me, here's the answer. Solomon is saying, not that they don't know anything, but they don't know anything under the sun. They don't know what's going on here upon the earth. So they have knowledge, but it's limited knowledge. It's not, they don't know what's happening, what I'm doing, the choices that I'm making. Now, there's another way of looking at these verses. And from a standpoint of they know nothing with regards to anywhere else other than where they are. In other words, do you know right now what's happening at Walmart? Right now, do you know what's happening? Do you know where everybody is at Walmart? Do you know who's at Walmart? No. But do you know who's here in this auditorium? And do you know what's going on and what's being said? Yes. So we know and we have knowledge where we are, but not where we're not. That's what I think Solomon is teaching. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to be taught. I'm willing to be told I was wrong. I've been told that before. It's all right. It's all right, because I might be. I don't think whatever your interpretation of this is going to affect your salvation or my salvation. So, having said that, and knowing that I did it almost up to the bell, somebody have something they want to say so that we can chew on it till next Sunday. Yeah. Yeah, I have a whole series of Bible lessons on death, dying, and all of that. It's kind of morbid, but it does talk about, that the thief on the cross is put in, and we talk about a lot of different things. But yeah, that's a good point. Mm. Right. That's exactly right, and that is another way of looking at these verses, and I think justifiably so. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting take. Anything else? Well, I know it's time to quit. So maybe I've sparked an interest. And if we do that, that's good. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this day, for the blessing of it, for the opportunity to study your word. And while we realize that sometimes we get stumped, sometimes we don't understand everything that's there, we're thankful for what we do understand. We're thankful for the fact that you revealed it to us. And we ask that you always open our eyes so that we see what is there and understand. Because in the end, really, our desire is to be with you for an eternity. And we ask that we will always see what's there so that we can follow that and follow your will. And so that in the end, we'll hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant. We ask that you be with us now, watch over us, bless us, and keep us, and hold us as we hold to you. For this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Y'all have a great week. Thank y'all.